after Sam Raimi's beloved Spider-Man trilogy came to an unexpected end and Spider-Man 4 never really got to happen, many fans really wanted to know whether the world was ready for another reboot. And it was like 5 years later. And said Spider-Man 3, right? It was like 5 years after that. And I was like, that's kind of fast, but hey. The Amazing Spider-Man arrived with this new creative vision, this new cast, a more grounded take on Marvel's Spider-Man, and directed by Marc Webb. Bringing in the 29-year-old Andrew Garfield, who's actually older than Tobey Maguire when Tobey Maguire started being Peter Parker. And the film sought to modernize Spider-Man for a new generation while exploring parts of the character that previous films had only touched on. I do want to throw in my aspect of they definitely went for a darker tone because of like the Dark Knight. I genuinely think it's a Spider-Man movie, but everything was all dark and a little serious, and it's just like, it's not really how I like Spider-Man, but I know what they were shooting for. Although it was initially met with skepticism because of its proximity to the Raimi trilogy, The Amazing Spider-Man has since earned actually a much warmer reception. Many fans now appreciate its emotional storytelling, impressive action, and Andrew Garfield's heartfelt performance. I have always thought that Andrew Garfield was really good. I do think that the Amazing Spider-Man movies as a whole are more less good, but that's not because they were next to the Raimi trilogy. I just wasn't a big fan of the writing, some of the decisions that they went with, but I do enjoy Andrew Garfield and Emma Stone as Peter and Gwen. I think they are probably two of my favorite castings to ever do it, but unfortunately, Marc Webb's directing and some of the writing for the Amazing movies were kind of stupid. But unlike previous adaptations, The Amazing Spider Man put a much bigger emphasis on Peter's parents in the mystery surrounding their disappearance, which I thought was very cool. I thought that was a cool idea. Most mediums don't really tackle that concept of Peter's parents, so that was pretty interesting. And as a young boy, Peter is left in the care of Aunt May and Uncle Ben, yada yada, the regular. And then he discovers clues connecting to his father's research to the powerful biotechnology company Oscorp. So right off the bat, they aren't really hiding anything super, really, and the things about the whole Oscorp thing. I was like, that's going to be so cool. We're not going to see Osborn in this one, but they're definitely setting him up for the sequel. Sure, and then that's pretty much what happened. And investigating his father's past, he's bitten by a genetically engineered spider, granting him incredible abilities, including strength. The typical Spider-Man story. Like we all know how Spider-Man gets his powers. Even in this, it was a little different than how he gets, but it's fine. Like I said, they did everything how Spider-Man's supposed to be, but they did their own little different thing. Like I wasn't a big fan of how Uncle Ben's murder goes down. Like I didn't think just a random guy robbing the store that pops him and ends him. I wasn't a big fan of that. I would have liked for Peter to be a little more for the whole thing to lead up. I would like it to have felt a lot more painful. But when Uncle Ben was killed in Amazing Spider-Man, I just didn't care. I didn't care too much, and I didn't like the idea that I don't know, like when he's going through his little metamorphosis, it's basically one big allegory for him being high. Like I don't know what was going on with that, but it is something that I think over the years I've been a little more warm to it. I mean, the argument pretty much taught Peter that his actions have consequences, and when Uncle Ben is killed, because he was out looking for Peter. So like I kind of get where they were going, but I just didn't really feel the same. Maybe that's just a comic book fan in me, or it's a Spider-Man fan in me. I don't know. But Oscorp, Kirk Connor's working for Oscorp, and he's trying to search for a cure to regenerate those limbs, which is usually the Kirk Connors thing, which I was impressed with. And it actually is left behind by Peter's dad's research, which I like, interesting enough. But it turns him into the lizard, man. And as the lizard threatens New York City with a plan to mutate humanity, Peter must stop him, who was once his father's friend, while uncovering long buried truths about his family's past. And Amazing Spider-Man kind of goes there. Like it just never really stuck out to me as like one of the best things I've ever seen. I remember being really excited for it when it first came out because I was like, "Hey, a new Spider-Man movie. This is cool." But then I saw the suit and I was like, like a bunch of basketballs kind of tied together, and then they like painted them blue and red for Spider-Man. Look, I wasn't a big fan of that, and I think that that might have just been because Sam Raimi's Spider-Man suit was everything to me. I was like, "Yo, that is Spider-Man, yo! Like that suit is everything." But I will say, Peter in this Spider-Man movies was a lot more of a socially confident guy. He was a lot more witty, a lot more expressive, and very much not the kid who would have got picked on in high school. Like I always thought Andrew Garfield was a little too pretty, too charismatic. Whereas like Tobey Maguire, not a ugly dude or anything, but he definitely looked more like what I envisioned Peter Parker looking like as a person. I always thought Tobey Maguire looked more realistically kind of how I envisioned Peter looking, at least in the first one. But he is smart. One thing I do like about the Spider Man, he is really not saying none of the Spider Mans or all the Spider Mans are smart, but I like the fact that we see him do a lot more science, techie stuff as Spider Man, like developing the web shooters. Because in the Raimi trilogy, he had the organic web. So here we get to see him put the web shooters together. We get to see him do some other stuff, calculating his own experiments, trying to find the lizard. That scene's cool. Like there are some cool elements in this movie, and his Spider Man's actually funny. Where I feel like Tobey Maguire's Spider Man wasn't too funny, and it did feel more like a thing where it's like, oh, Peter and Spider Man feel like the same person. It's something that both movies trilogies have done rarely. Peter and Spider Man don't feel that different from each other. In the Raimi trilogy, Peter has the shies of everything, and Spider Man kind of feels the same way. He's a little more confident in Spider Man, but still different. Whereas here, his personality is what Spider Man should be, and it is, but then Peter Parker also has the same personality. So usually there's supposed to be like a switch, so you don't know, but that didn't really stick out to me as much in either filmography. So, and I know a lot of fans at the time kind of struggled with it, but he is one of the more accurate portrayals of Spider-Man's personality. I stand by that 10 out of 10. Just everything he does in the Spider-Man suit, physically, body motions, the joking, everything, it felt the most like Spider-Man. His performance is probably the best part of the film. Him and Emma Stone. I said it earlier. Their performance is what makes the film watchable. If these two weren't so good together, I don't think Amazing Spider-Man would have even had as warm of a reception as it does now because it just they make it work with what they have. It's legitimate. It is legitimate. So Andrew Garfield does good with the emotional stuff. He does good with the funny stuff. He does good with the generic Peter stuff. Andrew Garfield is legitimate. I will always give Andrew Garfield his flowers, and I will be giving his flowers again in a later video, especially in that later video. So keep that in mind. How I feel about the lizard? I feel like the lizard was kind of trash, honestly. Like I don't know, like there was the resonance there, but it just didn't work for me. And I thought the school fight was awesome. The school fight was awesome. I thought the scene where Peter was hunting him in the sewers and he just sneaks up and gets him, and that scene is really awesome. And that's kind of it. Like I wasn't really sold on the lizard like I would have otherwise liked to have been. I think I prefer lizard when he's more of like a mindless creature because usually when he's a mindless creature, it's a lot more dangerous for Spider-Man to deal with. So, and lizard usually gives Peter a hell of a hard time when he's like that. So I prefer mindless angry lizard. Yeah, it's a little bit of a cliche that the scientist becomes the monster, but he can't control it. But I prefer that to what we got because at least it kind of shows that the also doesn't like the way the lizard looked. I would have liked if the lizard looked more like the actual lizard instead of like I don't even want to know, bro. But the action in this movie is like the greatest point. I do think the action in Amazing Spider-Man is so much better. He's a lot more loose. He's a lot more flexible. A lot more athletic. It is like one of the coolest things about the movie. I do think the web swinging in Amazing Spider-Man is done really well, and I do think my favorite scene in the movie bar none is the bridge scene when he's like got the kid in the car and he pulls him out and he's like, I'm Spider-Man. I remember in the theater when that first came out, opening night, midnight, back when they used to do these, and everyone clapped for that scene because that is legitimately a great scene. That is like legitimately like the best scene in this film, prospectively. So that's one thing I will give because yeah, it's actually kind of good. Now, I don't think the Amazing Spider-Man doesn't hold up. I just don't think the Amazing Spider-Man sold me on the franchise because I felt like Amazing Spider-Man had too many things I didn't like unnecessary changes or the fact that there's scenes where it felt kind of dumb. Like, oh, I get it, New York's kind of helping Spider-Man out. And they're like, oh, all the cranes are coming out. He can swing across the cranes. And I'm like, I like this scene, but it's not like I don't know. It felt like they were kind of trying to do New York's got your back. You mess with one of us, you mess with all of us, and we're here to help Spider Man. But it didn't feel like it was like legit. It didn't feel legit. And I do think the final scene with Peter encounters is kind of dumb because it's like, oh, Lizard's like helping him up, and it's like he can stick to walls. He's not gonna die. You know what I mean? He can stick to walls. He's fine. Like I don't know, just like that scene felt kind of dumb as a Spider-Man fan, and that's probably just me being a little too critical as a Spider-Man fan, and I can admit that. But it is still pretty dumb. And certain scenes where Andrew Garfield's accent comes out, that's not even really me hating it. I just think it's kind of funny. He's just very much like, okay, his accent's slipping out a little bit, but other than that, it's fine. But like looking back over a decade, I would say it did age well. Like the movie looks good. It does look good, and it became like the romance between Peter and Gwen, in my opinion, is good. I like the romance between Peter and Gwen a lot more than I do the romance between Peter and Mary Jane in the Raimi trilogy. And their chemistry is phenomenal together. So there's that. And uh, I would still say the Amazing Spider-Man not like the worst Spider-Man movie because I do think the worst live action movie is the sequel to this, but I do still have things that I like. I do like that there's more credit to this movie now than otherwise did before. So it did, and I say like closing out. The Amazing Spider-Man. It really did have like a difficult task at the time. That was a rough thing to do to reboot one of the most beloved superhero franchises, not even a decade after a loved trilogy ended. That's hard to do, especially when you had Spider-Man 1 and 2 in that original trilogy, a flawed but worthy finale of 3. That's still a solid trilogy. And instead of copying what they did, they chose to make it a little more grounded, a little more darker, emotionally driven, and it works. It works. And like Andrew Garfield really brought that youthful energy. I think Marc Webb did give us some of the most visually dynamic Spider-Man swinging sequences, and that might also be because some of the web swinging was practical. Like I know the underbridge swing sequence specifically was done actually, so that's always cool when they can find something like that, something as goofy as web slinging, and make it look practical. And it does still live in the shadows of the Raimi trilogy. It does have a reevaluation, and I do think Amazing Spider-Man has cemented itself as still it's unnecessary as people saying, like, and it is kind of unfortunately caught in between that MCU Spider-Man Fox Spider-Man sandwich. It's kind of like that, like the lettuce, not even the protein. You know what I mean? So it is having its own things, but I do think it's I do think it's like maybe an underrated reboot, and I do say it was really probably supposed to be for the generation after us who grew up with the Raimi trilogy, and there's nothing wrong with that. So with that being said, I'm gonna close out this video. Like, comment, subscribe, and I'll see y'all on the next one.